So what's good YouTube? The 56mm F1.2 or the 50mm F2? This is a subject I spent hours researching before I picked up the 50mm F2, and it's a question I constantly get asked both on the comments here and over on my Instagram page. So in this episode I'm going to talk about that very subject and compare the 56 1.2 with the Fujifilm 50mm F2 lens. So I actually rented in the 56 1.2 twice last year. I don't own it yet, but it is a lens I am thinking about buying. Whereas this 50mm F2, this is one of the lenses I use the most. It's one of the lenses I've had for the longest amount of time. And to be honest, it's one of my favorite Fujifilm lenses, full stop. That said, as I've been getting more and more into doing street photography at nighttime, I feel like the 56 1.2 could be the better lens for that purpose. And also, I'm looking for a lens to do more portrait photography and product photography. So I've been researching these two lenses recently. So hopefully through this episode, if you guys are also thinking about buying either the 56 1.2 or the 50 F2, you'll be a bit better informed by the end of this episode. But yeah, let's get into comparing these two lenses and kick things off by talking price. Now there is a major price difference between the 50 F2 and the 56 1.2. This 50 F2 costs around £340, whereas the 56 1.2 costs nearly double, £850. There's also an APD version of the 56 1.2, and that costs around £1,100. So with the APD version, you get better autofocus rendering and better bokeh, but you do lose a bit of light, so there's a trade-off there. Meanwhile, there's also the 50mm F1, which Fujifilm released last year, and that costs £1,500, which is way more expensive than either the 56 or the F2. As for the size, weight and feel of these two lenses, the 50mm F2 comes in at just 200 grams and is relatively short, so it fits in perfectly with Fujifilm's other F2 lenses, being the 23 F2 and the 35 F2, and to be honest, the lens is small enough to just stick in your pocket or into a small bag. Meanwhile, the 56 1.2 is over double in weight and comes in at about 405 grams. It's a bit taller and it's definitely a lot wider. Seeing that the 56mm has an aperture of 1.2, its weight and size isn't actually that bad. And when you compare it to other lenses from other manufacturers with the same comparable f-stop, then the 56 f1.2 doesn't really seem like a heavy or large lens. But when you compare the two, this 50 f2 is tiny. And to be honest, it's one of my favorite things with these f2 Fujifilm lenses. And I've said it previously in other videos, but these f2 lenses are the reason I moved over to Fujifilm, because being able to use small compact bodies like the X Pro 2 or the X-T3, X-T4, along with high quality lenses which are also small and compact, suits my street photography needs perfectly. But let's move over to the autofocus, because this is probably where the f2 is miles ahead of the 56 1.2. So the 56 1.2 has the older focusing motors, and it's the same ones you find in the 35 1.4 and the 24 1.4, whereas this 50mm f2 lens has the newer Fujifilm focusing motors. In my experience using the 50 f2, the autofocus has always been reliable. I can even use it at nighttime without fail. When it comes to tracking subjects walking through the frame, it always does that perfectly. Now when it comes to the 56 1.2, it changed how I do street photography. I normally go for a more of a run and gun approach where I'm moving fast and I'm autofocusing quickly on subjects and then moving on. But with the 56 1.2, you can't really do that, and that's because the autofocusing is pretty slow. Sometimes it will jump between different parts of the frame when it was autofocusing, and also it wasn't very good at tracking subjects moving across the frame. That said, after a couple of hours getting used to the 56 1.2, I adapted my style, and I really did enjoy using that lens for street photography. If you are a fast street photographer, or you know that you're going to be taking photos of fast moving subjects, then the 50 f2 will probably be the better option. So let's talk image quality, and this is where I feel the 56 1.2 takes the lead over the 50. Now both of these two lenses, like all of Fujifilm's lenses to be honest, takes really good sharp photos, but when you look at the autofocus areas, the 56 1.2 is miles ahead of the 50 f2. With the 56 1.2, the backgrounds are a lot more creamy, the bokeh looks better, and to be honest, it's to be expected seeing that the 56 is a 1.2 whereas the 50mm is f2. From my experience, there is a noticeable difference between the photos taken on the 56 to those taken on the 50. And the ones on the 56 have a bit more of a film-like quality to them, a bit like with the 35 1.4, where the focus area just rolls off smoothly into the background, whereas with the 50 f2 it's a bit more clinical and sharp. So with both lenses you are going to get really good shots, but if I had to choose between either the 56 or the 50 when it comes to image quality and just the look and feel of the photos being taken, I'd go for the 56 1.2. So as with all the older Fujifilm lenses, the 34 1.4 and the 24 1.4, the 56 1.2 isn't weather resistant. So if you are shooting in cities where it does rain often, then using the 56 1.2 can be a problem. So here in London, where it likes to rain pretty often, I often find myself looking at the weather report before I head out, and that helps me decide which lenses I'm going to take with me. Meanwhile, the 50 f2 is weather resistant, and I've tested the weather resistance on this lens thoroughly. I've been up mountains in Japan where it's rained non-stop for 12 hours. This lens has survived with absolutely no problems. I use it all the time in London when it's raining or when it snowed, and yeah, again, no problems whatsoever, and I've been using it for 3 to 4 years now. So let's move on to how these two lenses compare when it comes to shooting at night time or in low light conditions. So the main reason I want to pick up a 56 1.2 is because I've been getting more and more into street photography at night time lately, and I find that the f2 lenses, while they are good for street photography at night, I find that I have to push the ISO a bit higher than I'm comfortable with doing. So the 56 1.2 is a full stop and a third faster than this 50 f2, and it allows you to take photos at a lower ISO in lower light conditions. That said, autofocus does come into play when you're taking photos at night time with these two lenses. With the 50mm f2, it was far easier to lock onto targets, whereas with the 56 1.2 it was a bit more difficult, and sometimes I had to resort to using manual focusing, which can be difficult when you're using a 1.2 aperture. If I was to compare the two when it comes to doing street photography at night time, I'd say that the 56 1.2 is a better experience and you have a bit more creative freedom, especially with that f1.2 aperture. So which one of these two lenses would I recommend? Despite the 56 1.2 probably being one of Fujifilm's best lenses in terms of image quality, I'd actually recommend the 50 f2 over the 56. It's smaller, it's lighter, it's weather resistant, and best of all, it's almost half the price. That said, if you are into portrait photography or you do a lot of product photography, then the 56 1.2 may be the better option, and that's because you're going to have more creative freedom with that f1.2 aperture, and secondly, the autofocus areas on the 56 do look nicer than the 50. But as with the comparison between the 35 f2 and the 35 f1.4, you can't really go wrong with either of these two lenses, and to be honest, you can make a case for owning both. So yeah, that's my thoughts on these two lenses. If you have any questions about the 50 f2 or the 56 1.2, just drop them down below and I'll make sure to get back to you. As always, you can do me a massive favor by hitting that thumbs up button, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe for more photography videos. A massive thanks for watching this, and I'll catch you on the next one.